When we talk about how a narcissistic husband treats his wife, we have to begin at the beginning because the beginning is usually breathtaking. And that's not accidental, it's strategic. In the early stage, he doesn't just love her, he studies her. He pays attention to her dreams, her insecurities, the things she never felt seen for before. And then he mirrors them back to her in the most intoxicating way. Suddenly, she feels chosen, understood, adored. He tells her she's unlike anyone he's ever met. He says he's never opened up like this before. He moves quickly, intense conversations, big promises, future plans that feel almost cinematic. And here's the part that makes it so confusing later. In those early days, he may actually seem sincere. He calls constantly. He wants to spend every minute together. He praises her intelligence, her beauty, her kindness. He may even say, "I've never met someone who gets me the way you do. It feels like destiny. It feels safe." But what's really happening is idealization. She is not being loved for who she is. She is being placed on a pedestal for how she makes him feel. She becomes a source of validation, admiration, emotional supply. She reflects back the image he wants to see of himself. The devoted husband, the intense lover, the "finally I've found the right one" man. And then something shifts. It's subtle at first, maybe a small criticism disguised as a joke. "You're too sensitive. You always overthink things." It's said lightly, she brushes it off. But the compliments become less frequent. The warmth becomes inconsistent. The attention that once felt constant now feels conditional. This is the pivot from idealization to devaluation. The pedestal she stood on, it was never stable, because no real human being can live up to a fantasy forever. And when she inevitably shows normal human traits, stress, boundaries, differing opinions, he experiences that as betrayal. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she stopped perfectly reflecting his grandiose image. And instead of adjusting to reality, he begins adjusting her. He compares her to who she was in the beginning. He says she's changed. He brings up the honeymoon phase as proof that she's now the problem. "You used to be so fun. You don't look at me the same way anymore." He creates nostalgia for a version of her that was actually just her trying to bond. What makes this especially painful is that she keeps chasing that early version of him. She thinks, if I can just get back to how we were, if I can just be more patient, more loving, less reactive, maybe that warm, attentive man will come back. But here's the hard truth. That version wasn't sustainable because it wasn't authentic. It was a hook. During devaluation, criticism replaces admiration. Appreciation turns into entitlement. He may start highlighting her flaws in front of others. He may withdraw affection to punish her. He may become emotionally cold after conflicts, leaving her desperate to repair things. And because she remembers how good it was in the beginning, she internalizes the blame. She thinks she must have done something to cause this shift. She analyzes herself endlessly. She tries harder. Meanwhile, he feels powerful. The more she works to regain his approval, the more control he has. And this is where the psychological trap tightens. Intermittent reinforcement. Sometimes he'll give her a glimpse of that old affection. A good weekend, a sweet message, a moment of connection, just enough to keep her hoping. And hope is powerful. She clings to the belief that the loving husband is still in there somewhere, that stress, work, or misunderstandings are the reason for the change. She doesn't yet see the pattern because no one wants to believe that the most beautiful chapter of their love story was actually the setup. Over time, the emotional climate becomes unstable. She feels like she's walking on eggshells. The same man who once adored her now seems irritated by her presence. The qualities he once praised are now the ones he mocks. Her independence becomes selfish. Her emotions become dramatic. Her needs become too much. This erosion doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, so gradually that she often can't pinpoint when things truly changed. And that's why this first stage matters so much, because the idealization phase is not proof of deep love. It is proof of intense projection. He didn't fall in love with her complexity. He fell in love with how she made him feel about himself. And when that high inevitably faded, instead of deepening into real intimacy, he shifted into control. So if you are sitting here remembering how magical it once felt, I want you to understand something very clearly. The beginning was powerful, not because it was permanent, but because it was persuasive. And love that begins as a performance will always end as a punishment. Real love deepens with reality. Narcissistic love collapses under it. And the moment the pedestal starts to wobble, the fall begins. Now, once that shift from idealization to devaluation begins, something else becomes very clear in the marriage. Accountability disappears. And this is where many women start to feel like they're losing their footing entirely. Because in a healthy relationship, conflict is uncomfortable but mutual. Two people disagree, two people reflect, two people repair. But with a narcissistic husband, conflict has only one destination, and that destination is her fault. It doesn't matter how the argument starts. Maybe she calmly brings up something that hurt her. Maybe she asks why he came home late without calling. Maybe she expresses that she feels lonely in the marriage. What begins as a reasonable concern somehow spirals into a courtroom drama where she is suddenly on trial. He doesn't respond to the content of what she's saying. He responds to the threat of being wrong. And because being wrong feels intolerable to him, he has to move the spotlight fast. So instead of addressing the issue, he critiques her tone. Why are you attacking me? He questions her timing. Why do you always bring things up when I'm tired? He flips the narrative. You're never satisfied. Within minutes, she's defending herself rather than discussing the original problem. And here's what makes this so destabilizing. It happens consistently. Over time, she begins to anticipate it. She rehearses conversations in her head. She softens her voice. She over-explains. She adds disclaimers like, I'm not blaming you. I just feel. She walks on eggshells just to avoid the explosion, but the explosion still comes. If he forgets something important, she's too demanding. If he lies and gets caught, she's too suspicious. If he cheats, somehow the conversation becomes about how she wasn't supportive enough, attentive enough, affectionate enough. The betrayal becomes her deficiency. This isn't just defensiveness, it's psychological redirection. Because admitting fault would require vulnerability, and vulnerability feels like weakness. So instead, he constructs a reality where he is perpetually misunderstood, unfairly criticized, or even victimized. And this is where gaslighting begins to intertwine with blame shifting. He rewrites what happened. He says she's exaggerating. He insists she's remembering it wrong. He may even bring up unrelated past mistakes to overwhelm the conversation. Now she's confused. She came in with one issue, and she leaves questioning herself entirely. And over time, something heartbreaking happens. She stops bringing things up, not because the issues are resolved, but because it feels pointless, exhausting, unsafe. She learns that expressing hurt leads to punishment, that asking for accountability leads to attack. So she shrinks her needs. She tells herself she's overreacting. She tries to be low maintenance. But resentment doesn't disappear just because it's swallowed. Inside, she feels unseen, unheard, alone in a marriage that looks intact from the outside. And the more she suppresses herself to keep the peace, the more he feels entitled to that silence. Now, here's another layer that's important to understand. When he shifts blame onto her, it's not random. It's strategic self-protection. If he convinces her that she's the problem, then he never has to examine himself. And if she internalizes that belief, she becomes easier to control because a woman who doubts herself will work harder to please. She may start reading relationship books, watching videos, trying to communicate better. She might even go to therapy alone, believing she's the one who needs fixing. Meanwhile, he sits comfortably in his narrative. I'm fine. She's difficult. And when this dynamic plays out for years, it does something profound to her sense of self. She may become anxious before conversations. She may feel her heart race during minor disagreements. She may apologize automatically, even when she's not wrong. Her nervous system adapts to chronic blame. And yet, if you ask him, he'll say he's the one who's exhausted, the one who can't do anything right, the one who feels attacked all the time. This is the emotional inversion that defines narcissistic marriages. Reality becomes upside down. The injured party feels guilty. The harmful party feels justified. And here's the crucial insight. This pattern continues not because she is weak, but because she is hopeful. She believes that if she can just explain herself clearly enough, calmly enough, logically enough, he will finally understand. But the issue is not misunderstanding. The issue is unwillingness to tolerate fault. A healthy partner can sit with discomfort. A narcissistic partner deflects it. So if you find yourself constantly apologizing for things you didn't do, if every disagreement ends with you feeling smaller, if accountability feels like a foreign language in your marriage, I want you to pause. Blame is not resolution. It is avoidance. And a relationship where only one person is ever wrong is not a partnership. It is a power structure. And love cannot survive where responsibility does not exist. After the blame shifting becomes routine, something else begins to crystallize in the marriage: control. And I want to be very clear here. Control in narcissistic relationships rarely begins with obvious domination. It doesn't usually walk in wearing a villain's cape. It starts small, subtle, almost reasonable. In the beginning, it may even look like care. He questions her spending. I'm just trying to help us budget better. He comments on her friends. I don't think they're a good influence on you. He suggests what she should wear to a work event. That doesn't really fit the image we want to project. Each statement is framed as protection, wisdom, leadership. And because he once idealized her so intensely, she may still trust his perspective. She assumes he has good intentions, so she adjusts just slightly. But control feeds on compliance. Once she starts accommodating those small preferences, the requests become expectations. The suggestions become rules. The "I'm just trying to help" becomes "why can't you ever listen?" And here's where the pattern tightens. Control isn't just about behavior, it's about access. He wants access to her time, her attention, her emotional energy, and he wants to regulate it. He may discourage her from seeing certain friends. He may create tension every time she visits family so that eventually it feels easier not to go. He may sulk or become irritable when she invests energy in her career. Over time, her world shrinks, not dramatically, gradually, and the shrinking feels like compromise. She tells herself marriage requires sacrifice. She believes she's prioritizing the relationship, but what she doesn't see yet is that the sacrifice is one-sided. Control can also show up financially. Maybe he insists on managing all the accounts. Maybe he questions every purchase she makes while spending freely himself. Maybe she has to justify basic expenses. The message underneath is clear: you are accountable to me. Emotional control is even more insidious. He studies what triggers her. He learns what hurts her. And then in moments of conflict, he uses those vulnerabilities strategically. If she fears abandonment, he threatens distance. If she values harmony, he creates chaos. If she seeks reassurance, he withholds it. Control is about leverage. And what makes it so confusing is that it doesn't always look explosive. Sometimes it's quiet. A look of disapproval, a heavy silence, a withdrawal of affection. She learns quickly which behaviors keep the peace and which ones trigger punishment. So she adapts. She filters her words. She checks his mood before speaking. She plans her day around his reactions. Without realizing it, she becomes hypervigilant. Her nervous system is always scanning. And here's the part that's especially important. He may genuinely believe he's entitled to this level of influence. In his mind, leadership means dominance, respect means obedience. Partnership feels threatening because partnership implies equality, but equality challenges control. When she expresses independence, wanting her own hobbies, her own opinions, her own space, it doesn't register as healthy autonomy. It registers as rebellion, and rebellion must be corrected. So the pressure increases. Maybe it's criticism disguised as concern. You've changed. Maybe it's emotional withdrawal. Maybe it's outright anger. The goal is the same. Bring her back into alignment. Over time, she may not even recognize how much of herself she has edited. The clothes she used to love feel inappropriate. The friends she used to laugh with feel distant. The ambitions she once had feel selfish. Control has a way of rewriting identity. And because this happens in layers, she may struggle to explain it to others. There isn't always a single dramatic moment. It's a pattern of small adjustments that accumulate into profound restriction. Now let's be clear. Control is not the same as partnership. Healthy relationships involve negotiation, collaboration, mutual influence. But control demands hierarchy. One voice dominates, the other adapts. And when she starts sensing that imbalance, when she feels smaller in her own life, she may attempt to push back, gently at first. I'd like to handle this myself. I don't agree. I'm going to see my friends tonight. And this is when the system reveals itself. Because true partnership can tolerate disagreement. Control cannot. If her independence triggers escalation, anger, guilt-tripping, silent treatment, character attacks, that tells you something very important. It tells you that the structure of the marriage was built around power, not connection. And the most dangerous part of control is not that it limits her behavior, it limits her perception. When someone else consistently defines what is reasonable, appropriate, or acceptable, you slowly lose trust in your own judgment. You begin asking permission for things you once decided freely. You hesitate before speaking your truth. You measure your worth by his approval. And that is not love. That is conditioning. So if you find yourself constantly adjusting to avoid conflict, if your world feels smaller than it used to, if your independence feels like a threat in your own marriage, pause. Control does not grow in healthy soil. And the moment you have to shrink to keep the peace was never real to begin with. Once control becomes a pattern, the next dynamic that emerges is emotional withdrawal, the withholding of intimacy. And this is where many wives start to feel the emptiness most profoundly, because it's not always obvious at first. He's there, physically. He may even share the house, meals, routines, but he is absent where it counts. Emotionally. In a healthy marriage, intimacy isn't just physical. It's the feeling that your partner sees you, truly sees you, and values your inner world. It's the confidence that your thoughts, your feelings, your fears, and your joys matter. But a narcissistic husband often treats marriage as a stage rather than a shared life. His emotional presence is conditional. It comes when he wants supply, admiration, or control, and vanishes the moment she seeks genuine connection. Early in the relationship, she may have felt he was attentive. He noticed her moods, asked about her day, mirrored her feelings, but now that responsiveness disappears. He stops asking. He stops listening. Conversations become transactional, surface level. She may bring up a concern, share excitement, express vulnerability, and he either changes the subject, dismisses her, or offers a perfunctory response. The warmth that was once intoxicating is now distant, mechanical, or absent altogether. And it's not always overt cruelty. Sometimes it's subtle, a quiet indifference, a blank stare, the silent scrolling on a phone when she's talking, a dismissive sigh. These small moments of withdrawal, repeated over and over, create a deep sense of loneliness. She is physically present, married to a man who lives parallel to her world rather than within it. What makes this so damaging is that women instinctively seek emotional connection. They reach out, they try to engage, they ask for reassurance, for empathy, for affection, all the things a partner should naturally give. And when these requests are ignored, minimized, or even ridiculed, the message is loud and clear. Your inner world doesn't matter. She may begin to adjust her expectations. She might stop sharing. She may start censoring her thoughts and feelings. She may tell herself, I shouldn't be so needy, maybe I'm asking too much. And in doing so, she unwittingly teaches the narcissistic husband that he doesn't need to engage emotionally. He doesn't need to offer empathy, support, or intimacy because she will adapt. And then there is the strategic aspect. Emotional withdrawal is a form of control. By withholding connection, he creates tension, discomfort, and longing. She begins to chase, to seek validation, to attempt to repair the emotional distance. This intermittent attention becomes addictive. She remembers the way he used to be, the flashes of warmth, the moments when he seemed to truly care, and she hopes desperately that it can return. But here's the hard truth. Those moments were never consistent because they weren't authentic. They were tactical. They were designed to maintain attachment, to reinforce dependence, and to keep her engaged in the relationship on his terms. When she becomes too comfortable, too secure, or too independent, he withdraws. When she shows strength or challenges him, he withdraws. Emotional presence is a reward, not a given. This dynamic has profound psychological effects. Over time, she may feel invisible, undervalued, and chronically anxious. She may question her own perceptions. She may wonder, am I overreacting? Am I imagining things? She begins to internalize the withdrawal as her own failure, believing that if only she were better, more attentive, or more loving, he would return emotionally. And that's precisely the trap. Narcissists thrive when their partners assume responsibility for the relationship's emotional health. By keeping intimacy conditional, he shifts the burden onto her. Her efforts to repair, to connect, to nurture, all feed his sense of power while leaving her exhausted and insecure. It's important to note that this emotional withholding often escalates during conflict. He may refuse to speak, turn away from the conversation, or employ the silent treatment. He may withhold not just warmth, but acknowledgement, validation, and even basic communication. These patterns teach her that expressing needs is dangerous, uncomfortable, or futile. Over time, her nervous system adapts to this chronic unavailability. She becomes hypervigilant, anticipating withdrawal. She may feel anxious when he seems distant, even in neutral moments. She may overcompensate with effort, attention, or compliance. The marriage becomes a minefield, not a sanctuary. Yet, while this dynamic is painful, understanding it is crucial. Emotional withdrawal is not a reflection of her worth, her attractiveness, or her value. It is a calculated expression of the narcissist's need for control, validation, and self-preservation. Recognizing this allows her to step back, to name the pattern, and to reclaim her own emotional life without being pulled into the cycle of chasing what he will never reliably give. So if you feel invisible, unheard, or chronically disconnected in your marriage, I want you to hear this clearly. Absence of emotional intimacy is not your fault. And longing for what should be mutual does not make you weak. Love is meant to be shared, felt, and reflected, not rationed for the narcissist's convenience. Because in a marriage where emotional presence is withheld, what is left is not love. It is control disguised as distance. And the moment we recognize that, we reclaim the power to define our own emotional reality. Once emotional intimacy is withheld, another insidious pattern often emerges: gaslighting. And I want to be very clear. Gaslighting isn't just lying. It's a deliberate, systematic distortion of reality that makes her question her own perceptions, memory, and sanity. And when it happens in a marriage, it can be devastating because the person she should be able to trust most is the one undermining her sense of reality. It often starts subtly. Maybe he says something he promised he would do and then denies ever saying it. "I never told you that," he says, even though she clearly remembers the conversation. At first, she may question herself. Did I misunderstand? Did I imagine it? She doubts because he seems so confident, so certain, and that doubt is exactly what he wants. Gaslighting is effective because it preys on the normal human tendency to trust our partners. We believe that the people closest to us will reflect truth, not distort it. So when a husband consistently denies facts, rewrites history, or presents an alternative version of events, it shakes the foundation of her confidence. She begins to second-guess herself. Her memory, her judgment, even her feelings become suspect. And it doesn't stop at simple denial. He may escalate. He may claim she's being too sensitive or overreacting. "You're imagining things again," he might say. Or he may accuse her of lying or manipulating when in fact it's he who is doing the manipulating. In a clever twist, the abuser frames himself as the victim of her supposed distortions. This inversion is confusing, disorienting, and deeply destabilizing. Over time, these patterns create a chronic sense of insecurity. She may start checking herself constantly. Am I remembering this right? Did I say something wrong? Did I misinterpret his tone? The internal dialogue becomes exhausting. Her self-esteem erodes not because she is faulty, but because the narrative she has been given about herself is false. One of the most insidious aspects of gaslighting is that it's intermittent. Sometimes he acknowledges reality. Sometimes he gives a small gesture of truth or warmth. These moments are like emotional breadcrumbs, keeping her tethered to him. She remembers that he can be kind, attentive, loving, and she hopes that the real man will reappear. But those moments are tactical, not genuine, and they ensure she remains entangled in the cycle. Gaslighting also serves multiple purposes for him. It protects his ego by deflecting responsibility. If she believes she is at fault, he never has to admit wrongdoing. It maintains control because self-doubt makes her more compliant. And it reinforces dependence because she will turn to him for reassurance, validation, and interpretation of reality. Think about the psychological weight of this. Every interaction is layered with uncertainty. She can't trust her own mind, yet the person who is supposed to love her is the source of the confusion. The very thing that should feel safe, the marriage, the home, the partner, becomes a place of questioning, second-guessing, and anxiety. And over time, her emotional energy is drained not by overt conflict, but by the constant mental labor of trying to reconcile what she experiences with what he insists is true. And here's another layer. Gaslighting is often accompanied by isolation. He may tell her that friends or family don't understand the relationship, that they are exaggerating or misinterpreting situations. This reinforces her sense of being alone and invalidated. The less she shares with others, the more dependent she becomes on his version of reality. It's important to understand that gaslighting is not a reflection of her weakness or vulnerability. It is a calculated strategy designed to destabilize her confidence and maintain control. And the longer it continues, the more entrenched it becomes. She may begin apologizing constantly, over-explaining, justifying her feelings, and questioning herself even for small decisions. She may become hesitant, fearful of making mistakes, not because she is inherently indecisive, but because the environment has taught her to doubt herself. And yet recognition is powerful. Understanding that these distortions are intentional, not reflective of her truth, is the first step in reclaiming her sense of reality. It is the moment she realizes that she doesn't have to bend to his version of events. She can trust her own memory, her own perceptions, her own feelings. That clarity is the foundation for regaining agency and self-respect in a relationship where manipulation has been normalized. So if you find yourself constantly questioning your own mind, if you replay conversations endlessly to figure out what really happened, if you feel like your reality is slipping through your fingers, pause and recognize this. You are not imagining things. You are not too sensitive. You are not the problem. Because the hallmark of gaslighting is the erosion of self-trust, and the antidote is clear. Reclaim your perception, name the distortions, anchor yourself in truth, trust what you know, and remember, a marriage where your reality is denied is not love, it is manipulation. And the moment we name it, we reclaim our power to see clearly again. Once gaslighting has taken hold, another truth emerges. For a narcissistic husband, marriage is rarely about partnership. It's about image, status, and supply. And this is where many wives feel confused because the external markers may look perfect. They appear to have it all: the house, the vacations, the social circle, the Instagram-worthy life. But the inner reality tells a very different story. He sees marriage as a reflection of himself, not as a shared journey. The wife becomes a symbol, proof that he is successful, desirable, admired. Her accomplishments, her appearance, her behavior, all are scrutinized for how they enhance his image. And when she acts independently or prioritizes her own growth, it threatens the carefully curated story he is telling the world. From the outside, everything may look idyllic. Friends and family may comment on how attentive he seems, how elegant the life appears, how charming he is at social events, and she may be swept up in that admiration at first, feeling proud to be part of a life that looks so impressive. But appearances are not reality. They are a tool, a way to maintain control, to gain admiration from others, and to reinforce his own ego. Inside the marriage, the dynamic is very different. Her needs, her emotions, her individuality are secondary to the image he wants to project. He may say all the right words about love and partnership, but those words are often hollow. They serve the function of performance rather than connection. If she struggles, he may brush it off or minimize it because her difficulties don't fit the image he wants others to see. If she succeeds in ways that draw attention away from him, he may feel threatened, jealous, or resentful. And this isn't always obvious at first. He can be charming, attentive, and loving when it suits him. He may attend events with her, show public displays of affection, and give carefully timed compliments. But these moments are calibrated to maintain the appearance of a perfect husband, not to cultivate real emotional intimacy. This focus on image over partnership has profound consequences. She may feel unsupported in pursuing her own goals. Her opinions may be disregarded. Her feelings may be minimized. Over time, she may notice that the marriage feels transactional. She is valued for what she provides to his status, not for who she is. Love becomes conditional on her performance, her compliance, and her ability to reflect his grandiose self-image. Another aspect of this dynamic is how he leverages admiration from others, compliments from friends, praise from colleagues, social validation. These reinforce his sense of superiority and entitlement. Her achievements, however, are often reframed in ways that emphasize his role or diminish her autonomy. She might be congratulated by outsiders, yet internally, he may make comments that reduce her accomplishments. "I helped you succeed," or "You only got that because I supported you," he might say. In his mind, the marriage is less about two people growing together and more about ensuring he looks good to the world. The imbalance this creates is subtle but profound. Over time, she may feel unseen, unvalued, and alone. She may begin to question her own priorities and desires, wondering why her needs are consistently secondary to the narrative he wants to project. She may try to please, to perform, to fit the role of the ideal wife that feeds his ego and maintains appearances. But no matter how well she performs, it is rarely enough, because the standard is not real connection. It is constant validation of his image, and the emotional impact can be deep. She may feel isolated, anxious, and chronically invalidated. Even though they are married, she may feel like she is living with a stranger, someone who is attentive to appearances, but absent when it comes to genuine partnership. She may invest more in maintaining the facade than in nurturing the emotional life of the relationship, creating a cycle of emotional labor that is exhausting and unrewarding. What's important to recognize is that this is not about her inadequacy. It is about his narcissistic worldview. In his mind, relationships are not mutual. They are a stage. He thrives on admiration, status, and validation, and the people closest to him exist to serve those needs. Emotional connection is optional. Partnership is negotiable. Her individuality is secondary. And when she tries to assert her own needs, to ask for support, or to prioritize her own goals, he may respond with frustration, resentment, or withdrawal. This is because her autonomy disrupts the image he wants to project. Her growth is threatening because it is real and independent, while his relationship is largely performative. He may even subtly or overtly compete with her successes, undermining her accomplishments or minimizing them to ensure the narrative remains centered on him. Over time, the pattern becomes clear. The marriage is not a space for mutual growth, empathy, or shared dreams. It is a stage for performance, and she is cast in a supporting role. And the irony is that the more she invests emotionally, the more she is measured by her ability to enhance his image rather than her own fulfillment. So if you feel like your marriage is always about appearances, if you feel like your value is measured by how well you reflect your partner's success or image, it is essential to recognize this pattern. Real marriage thrives on partnership, shared responsibility, and emotional connection. Narcissistic marriage thrives on performance, admiration, and control. And the moment we see that clearly, we realize a union built on status and image cannot satisfy the heart. It may look perfect to the world, but inside, love cannot survive where authenticity is optional and emotional reciprocity is absent. Once a marriage begins to revolve around image, control, and emotional withholding, another painful dynamic often emerges: competition. And this is something many women don't expect from a partner. A husband, the man who vowed to support her, to be her teammate for life, instead sees her growth and success as a threat. It begins subtly. Perhaps she receives recognition at work, a compliment from a colleague, or achieves a personal goal. Instead of celebrating with her, he may offer a backhanded comment. "Well, that's great, but it took you long enough," or "Don't forget, I had to help you get there." These words undermine her accomplishments even as they appear supportive on the surface. It's not about her achievement. It's about his perception of it. This competitive stance can infiltrate every part of her life. Her intelligence, her talents, her charm, her style, anything that draws attention or admiration becomes a point of comparison. He may belittle her ideas in conversations, dismiss her contributions at home, or minimize her successes in social settings. Sometimes he does it overtly. Sometimes it's subtle, a remark that erodes her confidence bit by bit. And it's confusing because on the surface, he may claim to support her. He may nod during discussions, smile during announcements of good news, even appear proud when others praise her. But the undercurrent is always there, a subtle tension, a quiet resentment, a sense that her success diminishes him. He experiences her achievements not as shared joy, but as competition he cannot tolerate. The psychological effect is profound. She may begin to self-censor, to downplay her successes, to hide her talents, to soften her accomplishments, all in an effort to avoid triggering his resentment. She may ask herself, should I really tell him about my promotion? Will he be happy, or will he feel threatened? She may even abandon pursuits she loves, fearing his disapproval or subtle sabotage. This competition is rooted in his fragile self-esteem and narcissistic need for superiority. In a healthy marriage, partners elevate each other. One person's success is celebrated, not resented. But with a narcissistic husband, her growth is a mirror reflecting his inadequacies, real or imagined. If she shines, he fears she outshines him. If she is admired, he fears losing status. And rather than recalibrating his self-worth internally, he projects these feelings onto her. Conflict often follows. If she asserts herself, expresses her independence, or pursues a goal he finds threatening, he may escalate with criticism, ridicule, or withdrawal. He may frame her ambition as selfishness, her independence as defiance, her confidence as arrogance. She begins to feel like she is constantly navigating a minefield where being herself provokes tension, and this is precisely the mechanism that keeps her in check. By subtly or overtly competing with her, he ensures she measures her actions against his reactions. She becomes hyper-aware of how her behavior affects him. She learns to calibrate her achievements, to manage her visibility, to temper her joy. Her life, her aspirations, her victories, all become filtered through the lens of his comfort and ego. Over time, she may internalize the belief that her success is dangerous, that she must compromise her potential, or that she is responsible for his feelings of inadequacy. She may question whether she is being unreasonable, whether she is too ambitious, whether she deserves her own accomplishments. In reality, the issue is not her behavior. It's his narcissistic need to dominate the emotional and social landscape of their marriage. Even small victories can trigger his competitive behavior. A compliment from a friend, praise at a meeting, a personal goal achieved. Each can become fodder for criticism, resentment, or silent withdrawal. And because these patterns are inconsistent, she is kept off balance. One day he may appear genuinely proud. The next day, he may undermine her in subtle ways. The intermittent reinforcement creates a cycle of hope and disappointment, keeping her emotionally invested while eroding her self-confidence. The danger of this dynamic is cumulative. Over time, she may begin to hide her true self, suppress her ambition, or abandon dreams entirely. She may stop sharing her joys, her ideas, her successes to maintain peace. And in doing so, she sacrifices authenticity and personal fulfillment, the very things that nourish identity, self-worth, and mutual respect in a healthy partnership. But the key insight here is this: a husband who competes with his wife is not exercising healthy self-expression or concern. He is enforcing a hierarchy that keeps her in a subordinate emotional position. He is prioritizing his ego over connection, control over collaboration, fear over love. And the moment we recognize this, we can understand that the problem lies not in her abilities, her confidence, or her success. The problem lies in the imbalance of the relationship. So if you feel that your marriage has become a place where you have to measure your successes, downplay your accomplishments, or suppress your talents to avoid tension, pause and reflect. True partnership celebrates growth, elevates achievement, and nurtures independence. Competition in a marriage is not normal when it comes at the expense of the other person's well-being. And the moment we see that clearly, we understand. Love is not meant to be a contest. A marriage that thrives on comparison, resentment, or subtle undermining is not a partnership. It is a performance built on control and insecurity. The day we stop competing with our own partners and reclaim our space to shine is the day we reclaim our freedom. And finally, we come to the culmination of all these patterns: punishment for independence. Once a narcissistic husband has established control, manipulated perception, withheld intimacy, and competed with his wife, he cannot tolerate her asserting herself. Any act of autonomy, Setting boundaries, voicing opinions, pursuing personal goals is perceived as a threat, and the response is swift, strategic, and often subtle at first, but it grows in intensity over time. When she first begins to assert herself, he may respond with irritation disguised as concern. "Why are you being difficult?" he might ask, or "I don't understand why you need to do that on your own." These comments are framed as care, guidance, or logic, but beneath them is judgment, resistance, and a subtle warning. Her independence has disrupted the delicate ecosystem of control he has built, and he cannot allow that disruption to persist. If she persists, the tactics escalate. Silent treatment is common, a withholding of attention, conversation, or affection that communicates punishment without explicit confrontation. He may refuse to engage, to acknowledge her accomplishments, or even to respond to simple questions. The absence is heavy, and she begins to feel the familiar pull, anxiety, fear, and the desperate need to repair the relationship. Anger and rage are also tools. They may surface as criticism, name-calling, or scolding, often disproportionate to the situation. A request for space, a differing opinion, or a simple boundary may provoke explosive reactions. And because the intensity is unpredictable, she learns to anticipate danger in everyday interactions. She may walk on eggshells, curtailing her own expression to avoid triggering escalation. Blame is another instrument. He may frame her independence as selfishness, ingratitude, or failure to prioritize the marriage. "You're making this about yourself again," he might say. "Why can't you think about us for once?" By casting her autonomy as deviance or disloyalty, he reverses the moral framework, positioning himself as the reasonable, patient partner and her as the one at fault. Victimhood becomes a tool as well. He may portray himself as misunderstood, overburdened, or unappreciated, turning her reasonable assertion of needs into evidence of her cruelty or insensitivity. She may internalize this, believing she is causing harm simply by standing in her own power. And as this cycle continues, she may suppress her voice, compromise her values, or abandon personal goals just to maintain peace. And yet, intermittent reinforcement keeps her entangled. Small gestures of warmth, attention, or acknowledgement occasionally punctuate the punishment. He may smile, give a compliment, or seem affectionate after a period of withdrawal or criticism. These brief returns to familiarity create hope. The hope that if she adjusts, tries harder, or pleases him enough, she will regain the loving partner she once had. It's this hope that keeps her invested, even when the pattern is damaging. The psychological consequences are profound. Chronic suppression of autonomy erodes self-esteem. She may begin doubting her judgment, questioning her worth, or fearing her own desires. She may overanalyze interactions, preemptively censor her thoughts, and internalize the belief that independence is dangerous. Her identity begins to shrink, constrained by his reactions, expectations, and control mechanisms. This dynamic is reinforced by the earlier patterns: idealization that drew her in, devaluation that undermined her confidence, control that limited her actions, emotional withdrawal that created longing, gaslighting that distorted her perception, focus on image over partnership, and competition that punished her success. By the time punishment for independence appears, she is often deeply enmeshed in the system. Each previous layer has conditioned her to doubt herself and prioritize his needs above her own. Recognizing this pattern is critical. Autonomy is not rebellion. It is self-preservation. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. It is necessary for a healthy relationship. Pursuing personal goals is not selfish. It is essential for growth, self-worth, and fulfillment. And the fact that these actions provoke punishment is not a reflection of her behavior, but of the narcissistic structure of the marriage. She must understand that resistance to her independence is not a challenge to be negotiated. It is a signal. It is a signal that the relationship is fundamentally unbalanced, that her individuality is not honored, and that emotional control has been weaponized. This recognition empowers her to reclaim agency, assert boundaries, and prioritize her own well-being. Independence is the ultimate test in a narcissistic marriage. The moment she stands in her own power, he feels threatened because he thrives on compliance, submission, and control. And the moment she realizes her autonomy is non-negotiable, she begins to dismantle the cycle that has constrained her for so long. So if you feel tension when asserting yourself, if claiming space, voicing needs, or pursuing personal growth triggers criticism, withdrawal, or guilt in your marriage, I want you to understand this clearly. The problem is not your independence. It is the dynamic of a relationship that cannot tolerate equality or self-expression. Because the truth is, a marriage built on control, devaluation, and manipulation cannot survive genuine independence. And the moment we reclaim the courage to stand fully in our own power, we break free from the patterns that limit us and reclaim the life we were always meant to live.